Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World Talks. After months of consultations, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy unveiled his much-anticipated victory plan at the Wednesday session of Ukraine's parliament, urging his war-weary country to stay united at a precarious time ahead of the US presidential election. One of the main points of the plan says Ukraine and NATO in the nearest future. And we'll talk about President Zelenskyy's proposal with Peter Dickinson, chief editor of Business Ukraine magazine, who's in Kiev now, and Mikhail Alexseev, professor at the San Diego State University. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
So let's start with Professor Alexseev. What was your first reaction to the plan? Well, it was welcomed today with applause by the Verkhovna Rada, but what about you?
Well, I believe there are two central messages that we need to take from this plan. One is that weapons are critically important right now, and particularly the permission to strike at targets within the Russian territory with more precise, powerful weapons at longer distance. The Institute for the Study of War identified about 250 targets that would be vulnerable to such attacks for Ukraine that would critically diminish Russian advances in the east. And those advances keep continuing. So Russia seems to have found a kind of winning slow strategy using glide bombs and small infiltration groups attacks. So this is crunch time. This is the time, basically, the implicit message that was not articulated directly is whether the West wants Ukraine to be on Team NATO or on Team Russia if Russia prevails over the long period of time with its grinding strategy.
Mm-hmm. Peter Dickinson now, well, the green light scenario for Ukraine using the long-range Western weapons is something that President Zelenskyy has been advocating for quite a long time now. Do you think anything may change in this regard anytime soon?
Good evening. Well, I mean, if we look at the entire victory plan, none of it was entirely new. It was really bringing together a lot of different wishes that Ukraine has expressed, requests that Ukraine has made to its partners. The issue of long-range strikes has been a key request for months now, as you mentioned. At this stage, the Americans are the main obstacle. The White House, the Biden White House, has been clear that they do not plan on changing their position there. So there's no real reason, as far as I can see, why that would change in the short term. It may well be that after November the 5th, after the presidential elections, depending on the result, we may see some movement on that issue. Ukraine's other key allies seem to be ready to give Ukraine the right to strike, but for a number of technical and political reasons, America still holds the casting vote, the veto on this issue. So until America changes its stance, we're not going to see, I think, any real breakthroughs on the long-range strike issue. And there's no particular indication we're going to see that now based on what Zelenskyy said. Zelenskyy has already spoken at length about this with Biden in Washington last month. And as we see, there was no change. So I don't think his going public with his comments today will make any difference.
Right. As I mentioned in the very beginning, I'd like to follow up on you, Peter. It was greeted with much applause by Ukrainian politicians, President Zelensky's plan. But what about so-called regular Ukrainians? Has Kiev reacting to this plan?
I would say there's not been a major reaction. I don't think it's really captured the imagination because it's not particularly new. There's no single message there in his comments today, in his plan today, that really captured the imagination, that really stood out as something new and a departure from what we've been hearing for many, many months now. So it was really a reiteration of Ukraine's key requests to its partners. In fact, if we look at all the points, they all relate to the actions that Ukraine would like to see from the country's partners. And in the current situation, I can say the mood in Ukraine is one of frustration and despondency to a degree about the limitations of the support the country's getting. So with Zelenskyy basically pinning victory on the role that will be played, or they hope will be played, by Ukraine's partners, I think that's unlikely to excite many people, because there's a lot of disillusionment about the support that Ukraine's receiving and about the limitations of that support.
Precisely. Now, Professor Alexseev, isn't the plan simply too ambitious? Well, it does not involve any negotiations with Russia. It relies solely on support from Ukraine's allies. What do you think? Well, the Secretary General, the Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, already stated he doesn't find it very realistic. Now, before you answer my question, let's first listen to the soundbite from Mr. Rutte.
On the victory plan, this is clearly Ukraine's victory plan, which we, of course, take note of. We will discuss. There are many items on that agenda which we will have to really deepen out, understand what is behind it. This is something which will take place behind closed doors, also with allies. So I will not comment on every element in the plan, but it is of course a strong signal from Zelenskyy and his team that they designed this plan, that they are now taking it forward. That doesn't mean that I here can say I support the whole plan. That would be a bit difficult because there are many issues, of course, you have to understand better, and you will have maybe some different views on particular aspects of the plan. But that doesn't say that we are not standing squarely behind Ukraine in making sure that Putin is not getting his way and that Ukraine prevails in this war with Russia.
So I can't support the whole of the plan, said Mark Rutte. So Professor Alexseev, isn't it a bit too ambitious what we heard today from Volodymyr Zelenskyy?
Well, I would say that the most important word in Rutte's statement was signal. And I think also NATO and the United States in particular need to consider the kind of signaling that we're sending, even with responses to the plan. There is a direct relationship between providing weapons to Ukraine and the prospects for any kind of peaceful settlement of this war. In essence, Putin will have no incentive to stop what he's doing unless he and his intelligence services conclude that Western support can increase and will continue and will deliver the kind of damage to the Russian military that Russia will not be able to counter and sustain. Unless that happens, there is no incentive for Putin to stop. If there is any kind of overture for peace negotiations, territorial concessions, I guess you referred to that, there was no mention of peace negotiations. Well, that will be taken simply as a message that why not take more, because Ukraine feels that it's weak to fight to defend what it has now. And so this is a very tricky situation. I think that NATO, the United States, are making a big mistake not signaling the intent or not allowing Ukraine to strike within the Russian territory, following up on the Kursk offensive. I think if it followed up closely to the Kursk offensive, we may actually have seen more signs from Russia on willingness to back down. But this is an opportunity, unfortunately, that is being missed as we speak.
Peter Dickinson, because the second point of the plan actually was about bringing the war to the Russian territory to avoid forming any sort of buffer zones in Ukraine. Realistically, can the US or NATO in general support such a plan?
Well, that has been a major obstacle since day one, essentially. The US and NATO, but all of Ukraine's Western allies were initially very cautious, or most of Ukraine's Western allies at least were very cautious about any activity at all on Russian territory. There was even a lot of reluctance to support attacks even in Crimea, which is internationally recognized as part of Ukraine. But Ukraine has been gradually pushing back on this reluctance. It's now the attacks on Crimea have been normalized for almost 2 years now. The Black Sea Fleet has been forced to retreat from Crimea. Ukraine has sunk around 1/3 of Russia's warships in the Black Sea, or damaged or sunk. So that's now taken as normal. That's now been accepted and normalized. We've seen this year attacks inside Russia become more of a standard feature of the war. Ukraine has carried out a large number of long-range strikes using its own weapons, most primarily drones. They've had a lot of success hitting Russian air bases, Russian energy infrastructure, and more recently Russian arms depots, arms storage sites to undermine Russia's war machine. So these attacks have been very successful. And then, of course, we have the invasion of Russia into the Kursk region, the cross-border incursion that began in August and is still continuing to this day. So, I mean, gradually, this reticence on the part of Ukraine's partners, this concern about military activity of any kind in Russia is coming down. You know, they're becoming more and more tolerant to those sort of risks. And they're starting to understand that Russia's red lines are actually really a bluff, primarily, that Putin has used to intimidate the West, along with his nuclear threats. They're starting to realize that there's nothing behind this. They're still reluctant to give the green light for long-range strikes, but I think over the last year we've seen a lot more readiness to accept military actions inside Russia. So that's certainly a direction that Ukraine would like to see continue.
Now, Professor Alexseev, the fourth point of President Zelensky's plan is about Ukraine's natural resources. And, well, those are obviously under the threat because of the Russian invasion. Now, those are to be jointly used by Ukraine, the EU, and the US. Now, is this to convince the societies, the Western societies, to support, to further support Ukraine, well, to see a clear profit in supporting the war-torn country?
Yes, and it goes to what I said about whether Ukraine will be on Team Russia or Team NATO, Team Europe, because Ukraine is a very rich country. It has a tremendous agricultural base. It has industrial facilities of world caliber, including in space industry. It has resources like coal, and it has natural gas on its Black Sea coast. So there's a great potential there, and Ukrainians would love if these resources, if this potential is developed together with the European Union, together with democratic countries, rather than being subjugated by kleptocratic, oligarchic Putin's regime. And so it's not just sort of to make things attractive, it's basically a reality. That's what it is. And I think for Europe, it's a message, you know, if we look in the future, do we want to benefit from Ukraine, or do we want to face a more threatening Russia that benefits from Ukraine?
Well, talking about the future, I guess it will be decided in the US very soon. I'm talking, of course, about the Ukraine's future. That's depending on who wins, whether it's Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. Peter Dickinson, Chief Editor of Business Ukraine Magazine, and Mikhail Alexseev, Professor at San Diego State University, were our guests tonight. It was a pleasure, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for watching, and of course stay with us for much more here on TVP World.